Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
All right, I'm trying to find this book. I'm not sure if it's here or not. I heard
Okay.
the Greensboro Public Library might have it.
Yeah.
But I need help finding it.
All right.
It's entitled Leaping Over the Ocean.
Mm-hmm.
Familiar with it?
I think so. Who's the author and what's the subject, Jen?
Well, it's Dr. Willie Coleman.
Yeah.
And the subtitle is Rereading Black Women's Mobility in the 19th and early 20th Century. So I guess history.
Yeah, I think that one actually just got returned. So if you want to follow me over to that middle aisle of books behind you,
Yeah.
it should be over there in the social sciences.
Okay.
And you can tell the social sciences here, the 300s, the sign on the end of the
Right here?
bookshelf. Yeah,
Okay.
so if you're ever like, you look up a book.
Gotcha. So if I wanted to find something else, you just go by the numbers.
If you're looking to browse or if you've looked it up on our computer and you find it, you know, kind of where you go, it's a roadmap.
Good stuff. I hope you got it.
So it should be right here. There you go.
You do have it.
So there it is.
All right. So once I check it out, how long can I keep it?
We only just got it about a month ago, so it'll be a two-week checkout. And everything else here is about 3 week.
About 3 weeks.
Checkout, yeah.
And I have to bring it. I'm only over here for my wife's
So you
job.
can return it to any branch. So like if you're downtown, you return to Central, or if you're out, you know, over by New Garden, out on the west side of town, you drop it off at Kathleen Clay that's out there. So whatever is most convenient for you, it'll end up back here.
Good, good. Well, I'm close to the Central.
Cool.
Well, that makes it convenient for me. Thank you, sir. I appreciate you.
No problem.
All right. Man, I'm glad they got this book. All right, gotta go check it out. Go check it out. Sit down, son. Hey, Dr. Coleman.
Hello there.
How you doing?
I'm terrific. How are
Man,
you?
I'm doing all right. I just checked your book out.
Oh,
I'm
did
about
you
to.
really? Oh,
Yeah.
that's terrific.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
it's a
think-
pretty good book. you
I
know.
bet so. Hey, you got a few minutes?
I sure do.
I'd love to talk to you.
I would love to have that conversation.
Okay, let's go over here.
Sure. I think history is important. I know history is important because it can tell us where we have been and it can prepare us for where we think we want to go. Everything and everybody has a history. And so if you want to try to think about how you want to be in the world today, it really helps to have a clue about how things have been in the past. Magru Sarah Kinson Green, whose name means black snake in the Mende language, is the most haunting for several reasons, because she was a child, a young black female. She had been captured in Sierra Leone in Africa in 1838 or 39, again, we're not too sure. She winds up in Cuba on a ship. That ship was called the Amistad in the summer of 1839. What happens next can be seen and understood best by the general public in a Steven Spielberg film called La Amistad. Once in Cuban waters, aboard this slave ship, the Amistad, it is taken over by the 53 Africans on that ship. That ship wanders around for 1 or 2 months. They're short of water and food, but it eventually wanders into American waters, and the Africans are taken into custody by the Americans. As for Margot, what makes her especially important? She not only survived one of the most well-known and bloody African shipboard rebellions on the shores of America, but she also left a stack of letters about her life and her survival after the Amistad. I was able to find some of her letters at the Amistad Research Center, which is at Tulane University in New Orleans. And there's another large, wonderful stack at Oberlin College in Ohio. Once removed from the Amistad, the whole group, all of them are put in jail, the children as well as the men. Eventually, the group is declared free, and they're declared free, and the law said at that point that they had been illegally stolen from their own home country. And so they were told that, okay, now go back home. Well, they had no money to get back home with, so they start doing almost a circus act going around the country, the northern states, and in New England, and having the children perform and the adults, Sin-Kay, show his muscles and how he had dispatched with the men who had captured him. So get enough money, and by 1841, they are back on another ship and they are going back to Africa. These are among the few African returnees that we can document, and Margru is among even a smaller number of female Africans that we can document having come to being brought to this country and then going back home again. Back in Sierra Leone, she works with missionaries teaching local natives to read. But by 1846, and we think she's about 13 or 14 years old, she's crossing the Atlantic Ocean for the third time, this time as a free person with a well-defined agenda. The plan, backed by missionaries and abolitionists, was that Margru was going to come to this country, attend Oberlin College, come back to Africa, and organize a school for girls. From her letters, we learn some of Margru's thoughts. I am now studying diligently, and she learned to speak English. I guess with children, it's much easier because she's speaking fluent English by this time. I am now studying diligently, but I'm rooming alone. This makes me think of home, and sometimes I feel so low-spirited, I cry and I cry. Nevertheless, by 1848, she had mastered prep courses and moved on to the college-level courses, taking algebra, geometry, Roman history, and philosophy. Now, half of those courses I did not take, and I went to a really good school. Did not take those kind of courses. She became the perfect symbol known around the entire world by those trying to prove that Africans could be educated, in quotes. This young African girl becomes the darling of the movement to end slavery, but she plays her part well. I have excellent timing, and I was really fortunate enough to come of age during the 60s when there was all of this talk about changing not just in this country, but around the world. And we were given permission, or we took permission, to begin to push against the boundaries that confined us. So it was okay when I was growing up, as I reached my adulthood, to ask serious questions about everything that existed. Why don't we have courses in school about black people? Like, why? That doesn't make sense. Why is it when we talk about history, we talk about old dead guys? We talk about battles and presidents. Everything and everybody has a history. So we would push against the boundary and say, well, what about the women? What about black people? You know, what about anything and everything? And that just being around in that time period gave me permission to ask all kinds of outrageous questions. And I'm so grateful for that. Anna J. Cooper, who was born in Raleigh, North Carolina. She's born between 1858 and 1860, just before the war starts. By the end of the war, she is among thousands of freed children and adults who are wanting to learn to read, and they called it catching some learning. They wanted to catch some learning. So children, adults, anybody who could make it to a chicken shed would go there, and there was usually one teacher to teach 10 to 100 students at the same time. The little school that she went to, the little shed that she went to, was called St. Augustine's School, and it still exists. It's St. Augustine College in Raleigh, North Carolina. The only job available to her, which is at a black school in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. at that period was the center of black intelligentsia. It had the largest number of black college-educated people in the country. But our little Miss Anna from Raleigh, North Carolina, is not intimidated by Washington, D.C. and all these hoi polloi black people. She begins her public life in D.C., and she begins making speeches on topics that were rare for women, be they black or white, of that era. In 1886, she makes a speech before the Convention of Black Episcopal Churchmen. And she says in that speech, And I need you to listen closely to this kind of closeted 1800s language, because it, you can say a lot very delicately at that time. The church discredits women by making marriage holy and at the same time insisting on celibacy for the clergy. This reflects discredit on women. But this is not the worst, because the licentiousness of its chosen servants invades the household and establishes relations which the church itself forbids, end quote. Now, I'm going to read that again slowly, and I'm assuming the adults in this room have caught the lesson that she's trying to teach. Because, a couple of months ago, that same issue is being raised in this country around the question of the church, around the church and licentiousness of its servants. She says, quote, yep. The church discredits women by making marriage holy and at the same time insisting on celibacy for the clergy. This reflects discredit on women, but this is not the worst, because the licentiousness of its chosen servants invades the household and establishes relations which the church itself forbids. I'm astounded by her. The title of her book, which is A Voice from the South by a Black Woman of the South, it's filled with those kind of comments that she made publicly, wrote publicly. It takes some cojones, guts to publicly say that kind of thing, but she did. Amazing women, amazing women. It did not occur to me. We were living in very dangerous times. I grew up in San Francisco, and so it was a time period when the Black Panther headquarters got broken into by the police. Angela Davis was on the run. I was her TA at one point, being locked in a classroom because we were afraid, the law was afraid, that people would come into the classroom to try to kill Angela. And I was generally dumb enough to be okay being locked in a classroom as her TA, because it was an opportunity to stand next to somebody like Angela Davis. My mother, she was not so pleased with some of the adventures I had, but I'm so grateful for having grown up in that time period. I left San Francisco, I went to Vermont. I was in Vermont, I taught there for 11 years, and was ready to retire, and looked on a map, remembered the Greensboro Four, remembered you had black colleges, which we don't have in California, and people don't understand that. They're west of the Mississippi, there are no black colleges there. So all of the black colleges, the Greensboro, the museum, the Civil Rights Museum was just getting started, and I literally got on a plane from Vermont, went to several cities. I was Raleigh, I went to Wilmington, I went to Asheville, I believe, trying to find a place that fit. And when I hit Greensboro, I thought, this fits. I love big cities, I'm a big city person, but I also like the small town vibe. Like San Francisco is a well-known city, but it's a very small place. It's not very big at all. And I like that. I like that about growing up in San Francisco. And this reminded me of that. And I've grown to love it. I've been here 15 years now, and I've grown to love it even more. And sometimes I'm not quite sure why, but I love this place. I wanted to create a book, a history book, certifiably footnoted with all of the academic blah, 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 but that people would read. And so I think I've done that. First of all, it's very small on purpose, but then when I talked to people in the academy, what I was hearing is that this is the kind of book we want to use as an adjunct piece for our students to read. They will have their main textbooks, but we sometimes want to add women into our curriculum. And so a light went off, and I knew I had to have a title that grabbed the academic world, and it's as evil or as simple as that. So the title bespeaks my difficulty with trying to walk this road of writing a book that people will want to read, but that also will be used by the eggheads, my discipline, my lifetime's work, who want something that will reach their students, but is also academically sound. And that title sort of I think, grabs that, that intention. It's cumbersome. It's a cumbersome title, but it says pretty much what I wanted it to say. I had a prohibition that almost cost me my job, except I had tenure. I forbade juniors and seniors, they all will have to do research papers. You cannot do a paper on Harriet Tubman or Sojourner Truth in my class. You cannot. And of course, some people chose to interpret that as, you know, I didn't understand how important these. No, I understood, but I also knew there were all these thousands, millions of other women. And you have to go and search it. It wasn't going to come to you like Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth. But it means you have to stretch your brain and broaden your questions. You cannot be satisfied with what's presented to you on a plate. Absolutely not. Well, particularly for black women, starting with slavery, of course, enslavement, of course, the intent was to always keep them in their place, not just theoretically, but physically. I mean, they were there to work. They were not there to think beyond what they were told to think. And so what we've developed, fortunately or unfortunately, and I think it's correct, is that 99.9% of black people, let alone black women, got to travel, move beyond their local environment. And I kept running across black women who not only left their local environment, but branched out beyond the borders of the United States. And that is an extraordinary thing for women in the 1800s, be they black or white, it didn't matter. For women to leave their city, state, or country was an amazing thing. It was only available, well, primarily available, to the daughters and wives and women folk of the mega rich. Other than that, 90% of women just were not allowed and could not move beyond a local area. And so when I kept running across these black women who dared not only to leave their local area, but to leave the United States of America on purpose, and especially during the era of slavery, that is an amazing thing. Those women are extraordinary women, and we know very little about them. We don't teach them primarily. Well, we just don't teach them enough, if at all. Mary Church Terrell. Anna Cooper and Mary Church Terrell led parallel but very different lives. Their differences and their similarities cautions us against trying to squeeze black women's experiences, past or present, into one small box. Mary Church grew up in the black community, but she did so in a family that was headed by a man who was becoming a black Southern gentleman. With his expectations on how his family should live, he sent his daughter off to college at Oberlin. At Oberlin, she meets Anna from Raleigh, and they both graduate in 1884. They never became friends, but they ran in the same circles, and they knew each other very, very well. While Anna from Raleigh starts job hunting because she has to help support her mother, Mary from Tennessee is off to Europe with her father as a graduation gift. She stays there, they stay there for 3 whole months, touring England, Belgium, Switzerland, and France. And then the father returns back to the United States, and the unimaginable happens. It was impossible for any woman, white, black, rich. This just did not happen. But she has talked her father into letting her live and study abroad by herself. They didn't know people there, they had no connections there whatsoever. And that year turned into almost 2 years. She embarks on what was a rarity for women of that age. She starts out writing anti-lynching articles for magazines, and she gets them published in both black and white publications. Even when she labels Northerners as well as Southerners a hateful and lawless people. She joins and leads local and national Black women's groups. And these are not tea and cookie women's groups. These are groups of women who collect food and clothing for the poor. They paid school fees for poor children. They supported a school or a home for the aged. They paid tuitions for nurses in training at Howard University. They organized campaigns against lynching, and they visited men and women in jailhouses, and they harassed public officials. Now, in the 1890s, harassing a public official, if you were Black, meant they would ask public officials to meet with them to discuss what was happening to their people. Sarah Parker Remond makes it even more difficult for us to kind of put all Black women of that period into one box. Because she was born, Remond was born freeborn, and she was the third generation in her family that had been born free in Massachusetts. And that's very unusual. Her grandparents, her grandfather had fought in the American Revolution, 1776, 78. So these are all Black women. It's so easy to say during that period, this is how Black women lived. It is not. Even these 4 Black women exhibit differences that we should take account of. The masses of Black women, if we could get into a history of the masses of Black women, because these 4 women are very exceptional in many cases, we would find so many different stories. And that's what I want to do. I want Black women to have the freedom of their individuality, even as they embrace being a part of a larger group and loving being a part of a larger group, but embrace their individuality as well. I'm so glad that within the last 6 months, I keep running across these things called Black Joy, because I think we need to see that. Black women especially need to see television programs or read books or unashamedly talk about being joyful. The bad side of our lives, it's there and we know it and we suffer the consequences of it every day of our lives. But we have got to find a way to find joy. And it's almost sinful in the eyes of many people for Black women to seek joy, just to be happy. That's not okay for much of the world if we do that. But if we don't do it, we're going to have more of what I'm seeing too much of today, and that is unhappy, unhealthy, sad, mean, unloved, good Black women. But there's no joy. There's no joy. So we've got to be responsible for our joy. We've got to go find it. We stay away from people who can't tolerate Black female joy. Don't be around them. Get away from them. Get away from them. We've got to find our own joy, or we are going to be in bigger trouble than we are today. And we are, as a group, in terms of health, we're in trouble. We're in trouble. And it's difficult because we are at an impasse right now around what to teach and who can teach, and a lot of it centered on the history. I would be sure to tell them, one, to find something that you are curious about or that you love. I don't care if it's baseball, cutting the grass, making a dress, and sink your intellect. I know this sounds simplistic, but sink your curiosity into that subject, because that can propel you to seek more and more advanced knowledge about that thing, and hopefully that'll branch out. If you don't, history is not something you can practice just because you have to. You have to find a way into loving and caring and teaching history. So you've got to find a thing, a physical thing or an idea that makes you curious or that you care about, and begin to focus your intellect on pursuing more knowledge about that thing. That'll see you past a lot of the craziness we're seeing today around what you can and cannot teach in history. And it's not going to be over quickly. I mean, I think we're going to have to ride this out, but history will out every time. And so just prepare yourself, hang on to your joy and your love of history, and be sure you're prepared. Prepare yourself absolutely and go for it. Don't let anybody stop you. Everything is transitorial. Where we are right now with history, this is a moment in time, because this too shall pass. This too shall pass.